Lord Seventh, is a priest novel. This is an audiobook made by fans for other fans. Disclaimer. The main couple of the story is made up of two men. If you don't like it, don't listen. Thank you. Remember, subscribe and click the bell to stay updated on all the new releases. Enjoy. Chapter 10. So-called Fortune. Following his arrival in the capital city, Wuxia had set off innumerable winds and waves, but following the day he astonished everyone with one shocking act. He didn't do anything that overstepped boundaries again. He nearly had no sense of existence as he stayed inside the post house. By the time the Chaminette hostages' estate was put into proper order, it was already half a year later, and it wasn't clear whether this was intentional or not. It was placed at the street behind the Prince Nanning estate. It went without saying that this didn't conform to etiquette, but no one cared because Sir Jian Xizong, who was ordinarily the most fond of using "this is scandalous" as a mantra, was in the midst of being browbeaten due to taking part in a scandalous crime. These matters, the secluded life Wuxia knew nothing of. But the similarly secluded life Jing-Chi knew them well. The Chaminette was at peace, but there were many people who were using the topic to express their own ideas. This gang of people, fearing a realm not in chaos, lined up together, then were able to circulate the man a few times around the whole capital. There were those who nitpicked Jian Xizong, from the way he conducted himself all the way up to his secret ties with a brutal peer, his ambitions being sizable and so on. Of course, everyone inwardly knew who that brutal peer was. When the severity was elevated a bit higher, he transformed into a certain someone who recognized neither father nor monarch, and thus was intending to rebel, etc., etc. Memorials involving the eldest scion's faction piled up like snowflakes. There were also those who complained of wrongs on Jian Xizong's behalf via denouncing black magic and shaman craft, from the technique of the shaman parasite to divergently discussing a major figure in court keeping a deist priest, listening to misinformation about immortal cultivation and alchemy. Everyone knew that Helian Chi's most trusted aide was a priest surnamed Li. For a moment, criticizing words such as evildoing, sorcery, and deviancy flew through the sky and filled it with an awful lot of back and forth, the dragon table on the verge of collapse from being unable to withstand the heavy weight. Despite the black smoke and putrid air in court, when it came to children who didn't yet have these worries, life nevertheless passed especially quickly. The youths grew tall like they were being stretched thin, not neglecting to both study and get lost in thought. Although Wuxia lived nearby to Jing-Chi, they didn't communicate much. The former had some sort of instinctual resistance to the pretty, refined teen, constantly feeling like there was a little something else blended behind that smile. He hadn't had very much contact with Central Plains folk before and didn't know how they ought to actually be like. He just thought the omnipotent eldest scion, who had been hollering for him to be killed that day in court, was fine, or the emperor that kind of didn't know what he was doing was fine, or the ever-encased in fog Sir Chen that no one knew what was thinking was fine. None of them made his hair stand on end like this Prince Nanning did. Jing Beiyuan seemed like he had the mist of a southern forest suspended on his face, as one wasn't able to make it out clearly when they drew near. Wuxia felt that this prince was unlike others of his same age, but a monster that had lived for an unknown amount of years, similar in age to the great shaman, or even older. Peering through the layer of dense fog abound in the youth's eyes, no one could tell whether the thoughts in his head were good or evil. Children in Nanjiang, at 4-ish years of age, learn the fundamental skills of hunting in the woods from adult men, as well as prevention measures against all sorts of toxins. At 7-ish, they could already go out with the grown UPS, and by the time they were over 10, they could survive independently. They were able to distinguish from a gust of wind whether something was a small animal for hunting, or a vicious, merciless beast, and able to see through the disguise of the most cunning fox, instinctually realizing where danger lied. Presently, instinct was telling him to not approach that teenager named Jing Beiyuan. Jing, one to rely on predestined affinity between people, was unperturbed. Feeling that he had most likely not hit it off well with this sincere-eyed child, he didn't bother him much. Only on occasion would he get caught by Helian Yi when he went out for a wander around, and whatever fresh stuff he received, he would always get Ping'an to send a portion of it over to Wuxi's place. Whether he was a wolf cub or a rabbit brat, he had to get familiar with him first, then they would talk. About 4 years passed in the blink of an eye, and in their span, he also mentally tallied up where the people of the shamanette's place came and went to all day long. Setting the chaminette backdrop aside for the time being, it was solely his act of publicly messing with Jian Saizong in court before that had already made him a gem in Helian Chi's eyes. What a shame that Wuxi was a relative of the donkey, and his estate had the exact same goods up and down its rafters, each of the Nanjiang warriors that watched the gates and guarded the courtyards having a donkey's temper. If they regarded you as being unpleasant to look at, then it was whatever, the entrance would be shut at once, they'd directly fling out the phrase "the master isn't seeing visitors," and you'd be invited to see yourself out. Since time immemorial, emphasis had been placed on not punching someone's smiling face. And the chaminette specialized in punching smiling faces. Jing secretly had Ping'an find a dependable person to make a good amount of bribes on Wuxi's behalf. He had quite ample family equity, adding on the many things Helian Pei bestowed him, he thus didn't care about this bit of coin, but Ping'an had sizable resentment about it every time. After a long time of this, he would pout the whole day, mumbling as he followed behind Jing. "Master, the estate has money, but you can't bring it to decline, you should manage it properly, even more so. I've never previously heard of throwing coin away from morning until evening." Jing embraced the previous dynasty's anecdote of hearing words being said yet not raising his head, and he quietly huffed out a single sentence. "Did you hear something?" Ping'an was livid. "Master, you are such a kept ingrate." The old steward had since officially unloaded his burden at the end of last year, asked for grace, then returned to his old home for retirement, so all matters of all sizes in the Prince Nanning estate were currently being handled by Ping'an. The start was bumpy with work baskets in a pile, the managing of which made the youth hard-pressed, and every day, 2 massive, dark circles were hung around his eyes like a dead dog. Jing didn't go regulate him, either. If a matter's management was bungled, then it was bungled. When there was a decrease or a surplus, he'd be well aware himself and not point it out, and when insignificant material possessions were added in, he wasn't distressed about them. Knowing that the kid had to experience this before he'd be able to heft things up, he allowed Ping'an to feel it out for himself, only putting a few words in on occasion. It could also be said that he had a natural gift for it. Ping'an was a kid of great wisdom that showed as stupidity. He looked to be a silly fool, but once he set to task at the business of being a steward, he was really good at it. It didn't take long for the tiny household matters, the farmsteads and shops, the silver coming and going, and the bribes going up and down to all be done fairly well, making him quite a bit of a useful assistant. His sole shortcoming was probably that when he first got to governing the household, he felt that earnings were lesser and expenses greater, so he constantly had some blockades in his heart when dealing with both. Over this last year, he was practically about to thread himself through the eyes of the coins, his own eyes full of their square holes, and what was most unseemly to him was that his own impudent master was the type to heedlessly waste all of them. "Master, after the new year, there will be talk of you going to enter court and listen in on its politics. At every festivity from now on, you'll have to bribe for social connections, and what place is lacking in silver? The late autumn air was faintly dry. Jing-Chi, disinclined to listen to his chatter, turned to go into the study. Ping-An, unwilling to let him slide, chased after him and prattled on. Why bother with this? Are you doing this to obtain the second scion's good graces, or for that southern barbarian to be grateful to you in the future? Good people don't act in this way, either. Jing-Chi stopped in his tracks, turning around to stare at Ping-An with a not-so-good expression. Unfortunately, Ping-An had a general awareness of what his character was, and understood that his angry look and sullen face were merely for others to see. He hadn't necessarily taken it to heart for real. Thusly unafraid, he continued to speak with a crude tone and deadpan expression. Master, would you say that what I've told is correct, or no? Jing-Chi's facial arrangement backpedaled in a flash, and he shook his head in exasperation. Why, Ping-An, this slave is here. Peering at his honest, plain, and good-natured look, Jing-Chi took a breath, then let it out, then discontentedly inhaled again, then let it leak out, choked up by his exceeding displeasure. All he could do was give one admonishment: if you take yourself a wife someday, you need to take a deaf one. With a swing of the sleeves, he left. Ping-An didn't care, keeping up the pace, and opened up his two super thick lips to proceed with babbling. Master, the 3rd of next month is Sir Lu's longevity day. An invitation for the banquet came. Do you want? Do as you see fit. Master, he's asked for you to come yourself. Sir Lu is a great Confucian scholar of the era, and the realm is full of peaches and plums that he's taught, and the autumnal exam has only just concluded, and the future upstarts of the court will all be going to pay respects, and he specifically sent an invitation over. Just say I'm sick. Jing-Chi's head was full of a droning buzz. How had he not previously realized that this joker Ping-An was so annoying? Prince, His Highness the Crown Prince intends for you to go there in person and use the display of respect to make more friends with some people, so your entering the court next year will go okay. Ping-An. Jing-Chi abruptly turned around. Starting right now, if you can shut up for one shishan every day, this lord will tip you. This trick was most effective, as Ping-An did indeed obediently shut up. And, speaking of Helian Yi, that was an additional scourge disturbing his tranquility. In this lifetime, he seemed as but a child. Jing-Chi coolly observed as he grew up bit by bit. He suppressed all that easily betrayed ire back down into the hollow of his heart as the other's face unmasked harsh contours, exactly how they were from his previous lifetime and slowly coming to match the man from his memory. In consequence, he realized that the one he missed for 7 lifetimes suddenly had his countenance blurred. He felt that the man who had been overly deep scheming in his youth was, in fact, simply a teenager that was painstakingly repressing himself and struggling inside of a crevice. At times, Jing-Chi would look at him and suddenly comprehend why the two of them had quarreled to an unending extent. It was likely because he had never previously understood him. It was likely because he himself was a child at the time, too, only seeing the other's shrewdness, yet not his silent endurance, and seeing his universal calculations, yet not knowing the paranoia and misery inside him. The young crown prince was too prudent and diligently plotting in his early years, suspicion already merged into the stuff within his bones. Jing-Chi thought, his own spot of machinations back then, which were regarded as the utmost of pettily brilliant, must have made the other incessantly apprehensive of him on the sly, right? Anyways, in this lifetime, he refused to be in charge of anything, and refused to think too much about anything. Only on the occasion when Helian Yi came over would he soundlessly accompany him to sit for a while, sometimes not even saying a word for the whole afternoon. Helian Yi would be lost in his thoughts and Jing Qi would be reading his own light books. When time came to light the lamps, the former would wake up from his daze and take his leave thereafter, or, from time to time, he would stay behind to have a simple dinner. This contrarily allowed Helian Yi to faintly take him as a close friend. Those misunderstandings that had been unyielding as stone in their previous lifetime seemed like they had never existed. There were many things in the world that one could seek but not find. In reality, though, it was simply that its denizens didn't know how to make concessions in order to gain advantages, and only claimed that Mother Nature toyed with people. Jing Qi still ended up going to famed scholar Sir Lu Renking's longevity feast, and that was due to Helian Yi leaving court first thing in the morning to personally come out of the palace and to his estate to excavate him out. End of the chapter. Stay tuned for more BL.